What if the next global superpower in space isn't the US? What if Africa plays a key role in shaping the future of space exploration?
The Belt and Road Initiative is taking cooperation among members even beyond planet Earth. Cooperation in space sciences and technology is seeing China transfer technology to countries such as Egypt. By funding space-related projects, Beijing is said to be not only empowering Egypt, but all of Africa. Here's CDTN's Adel Mehoui with more.
As the US pulls back on foreign aid and space partnerships, China is stepping in, building satellite stations, launching African space programs, and even planning a moon base with African countries. Over the past few years, China has quietly positioned itself as Africa's key space partner. Billions of dollars are poured into satellite technology, ground stations, and research centers across the continent. From Egypt's space city to Ethiopia's satellite tracking facilities, China is embedding itself in Africa's space future. Meanwhile, the US has largely ignored Africa's growing role in space. China has seen its true potential. Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. How far can US-China collaboration go? Let's find out. For decades, Africa was mostly overlooked in global space programs. The United States and Europe focused their investments on their space missions, rarely engaging Africa beyond basic weather monitoring or telecommunications. But China saw an opportunity. With Africa's geographic advantages, its untapped potential in space science, and its growing need for modern technology, China moved in fast. President Xi Jinping's announcement of a $50 billion investment in African space initiatives over the next 3 years is not an act of charity. It is a strategic move to secure influence over the future of space development on the continent. For African nations, this represents an unparalleled opportunity. Decades of Western aid often came with restrictions, conditions, and political strings attached, limiting Africa's ability to develop independent space programs. China, in contrast, has taken a practical and cooperative approach, offering direct investment, technology transfers, and specialized training to African scientists and engineers. With state-of-the-art research facilities and satellite assembly plants now operational in Egypt and Ethiopia, Africa is no longer just a user of space technology. It is a creator. But Africa's role in the space race is about more than just technological progress. It is about sovereignty and positioning in a new global order. The continent's strategic location near the equator makes it a prime hub for satellite tracking and deep space communications. Critics in the West have argued that these partnerships could create a long-term reliance on Chinese technology. However, the reality is more nuanced. The development of Africa's space sector is still in its early stages, and every nation that enters the space industry requires years of collaboration with established space powers. The United States, for example, has worked closely with European and Japanese space agencies for decades, yet no one questions those alliances. Why should Africa's partnership with China be seen as a dependency rather than an opportunity? Moreover, Africa's collaboration with China has already produced tangible benefits. Multiple Earth observation satellites, launched with China's support, are now helping African nations improve agriculture, monitor climate change, and manage urban development. These advancements enhance national security, economic planning, and disaster response, ensuring that Africa can compete on the global stage rather than remain reliant on Western data providers. The true contrast is not in whether Africa works with China or the United States, but in who has shown real commitment to Africa's scientific future. While China has engaged in long-term investments, the United States has taken a hands-off approach, offering little beyond diplomatic agreements. NASA currently operates only one ground station on the continent, while China has built multiple. Washington's Artemis Accords, intended to shape the future of lunar exploration, have only been signed by 3 African nations, a sign that the US is not offering enough incentives for broader cooperation. A major factor in this shift is the declining role of US foreign aid. Under Trump's leadership, America scaled back its financial support for African space initiatives, leaving a gap that China was more than willing to fill. The US has also chosen to focus on private sector-led space expansion, particularly through companies like SpaceX, rather than building state-driven partnerships with emerging space nations. For African countries looking for direct investment, infrastructure, and expertise, China has become the more reliable partner. Now the question is, what nation is particularly making significant achievements? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Here comes Egypt. Egypt's journey into space is more than just an expansion of its scientific capabilities. It is a statement of ambition, progress, and leadership in Africa's growing space sector. With a long history of scientific achievements dating back to ancient times, Egypt is now embracing modern space technology, proving that Africa can be a central player in the new global space order. The country's space program, driven by strategic investments and international collaboration, is no longer in its infancy. It is evolving into a powerful force with long-term goals, including satellite development, deep space exploration, and regional space leadership. At the core of this transformation is Egypt's Space City, a state-of-the-art space research and development hub located 30 kilometers east of Cairo. This ambitious project is a testament to Egypt's commitment to space exploration, and it serves as the headquarters of the Egyptian Space Agency. Space City is designed to be the center of Africa's space activities, providing the infrastructure needed for research, satellite assembly, and training programs that will shape the next generation of Egyptian and African space scientists. Egypt's space ambitions received a major boost through its strategic partnership with China, which has played a key role in accelerating the country's technological capabilities. While Egypt has long envisioned a national space program, the transfer of advanced knowledge, funding, and technical support from China has significantly reduced the time it takes to develop and launch satellites. One of the most remarkable achievements of this collaboration is the MISR-SAT-2 satellite, Egypt's first domestically assembled satellite. Built with China's assistance, this satellite represents a turning point for Egypt's independence in space technology. Rather than simply purchasing pre-made satellites from foreign suppliers, Egyptian engineers actively participated in the assembly, testing, and final integration of MISR-SAT-2. This hands-on approach is equipping Egypt's scientists and engineers with the expertise necessary to build and manage future satellites independently. Beyond MISR-SAT-2, Egypt has successfully launched other satellites that serve multiple purposes, including climate monitoring, agriculture planning, and disaster management. The Horus-1 and Horus-2 satellites, both launched in 2023, are playing a crucial role in Earth observation, allowing Egypt to collect and analyze data that enhances national security, resource management, and urban development. Apart from that, Space City is more than just an administrative headquarters. It is a technological ecosystem designed to host research laboratories, assembly facilities, and testing centers. The site also serves as the main location for Egypt's growing involvement in regional and international space projects. The Egyptian government has positioned Space City as Africa's leading space hub, making it a critical part of the continent's efforts to strengthen its space capabilities. One of the most advanced features of Space City is its satellite assembly plant, where Egyptian engineers, trained by experts from China, are working on assembling future satellites. This facility allows Egypt to move away from dependency on external satellite providers and instead develop its systems that cater to local and regional needs. With cutting-edge satellite testing chambers, Space City ensures that all satellites meet international quality standards before they are launched into orbit. The facility also houses space monitoring telescopes, which provide real-time tracking of satellites, asteroids, and other space objects. These telescopes are some of the most powerful in the region and are being used for both scientific research and national security applications. With this infrastructure in place, Egypt is positioning itself as a leader in space observation within Africa. Egypt's geographic position makes it a key location for space operations. Situated at the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, Egypt has a unique advantage in satellite tracking and deep space communications. Recognizing this, the Egyptian government is using its space assets to not only serve national interests, but also contribute to international space missions. Egypt's space program has already had a significant impact on the country's development. The data collected from its satellites is being used to enhance precision farming, track water resources, and monitor environmental changes. This is especially important for a country where agriculture and water management are crucial to national stability. Egypt has no plans to slow down. The government has laid out an ambitious roadmap for the future, which includes expanding its fleet of satellites, with plans to launch more locally assembled spacecraft in the coming years. So, Egypt's space program is no longer an experiment. It is a rapidly expanding sector that is shaping the future of African space exploration. With Space City as a symbol of this progress, and with China's partnership providing the resources needed to build a strong foundation, Egypt is well on its way to becoming a leader in the global space community. But with that, how is the US losing the space race in Africa? The United States once had the opportunity to be Africa's closest ally in space exploration, but instead, it chose control over collaboration. Rather than engaging African nations as equal partners, Washington approached the continent with the same outdated colonial mindset that has defined its foreign policy for decades, offering conditions, restrictions, and a condescending attitude rather than genuine cooperation. In contrast, China saw Africa's potential, treated it with respect, and helped it rise as a key player in global space development. As a result, the US is now losing Africa to China in the space race, not because it lacks technology or resources, but because it refused to see Africa as an equal in shaping the future of space exploration. For years, NASA ignored Africa's space ambitions, keeping the continent at the margins of the global space race. While African nations were eager to develop satellite programs, ground stations, and space monitoring systems, Washington offered little more than diplomatic gestures and symbolic agreements. Even when the US engaged with African countries, it did so in a way that reinforced dependency rather than empowerment. American space cooperation typically came with restrictions on technology transfers, political conditions, and limited access to high-level expertise. African nations were often left with hand-me-down technology, outdated infrastructure, and training programs that kept them reliant on Western expertise rather than building their capabilities. China, on the other hand, did the exact opposite. Instead of treating African nations as second-class participants, it shared technology, built research facilities, and trained African engineers to develop their space capabilities. China recognized that Africa wasn't just a customer, it was a partner in space development. This fundamental difference in approach is why today, China has deep space partnerships with over 23 African nations, while the US is struggling to remain relevant. One of the biggest reasons the US is losing the space race in Africa is that it tried to dictate terms instead of building trust. When Washington wanted African nations to join its Artemis Accords, it expected them to align with a Western-dominated space framework that would ultimately benefit US interests more than African ones. Only 3 African countries, Angola, Nigeria, and Rwanda, signed on, while many others chose to work with China's International Lunar Research Station, ILRS, instead. Why? Because China isn't asking Africa to follow someone else's vision. It is helping Africa create its own. While the US demands compliance, China builds infrastructure. While the US imposes restrictions, China funds education and training. While the US tells African nations what they can and cannot do in space, China hands them the tools to do it themselves. This is why African nations like Egypt, South Africa, and Senegal have chosen to collaborate with China on lunar exploration, ensuring that they will have a direct role in future moon missions rather than simply watching from the sidelines. Another critical mistake the US made was handing over its space leadership to private companies like SpaceX, rather than prioritizing long-term partnerships with African governments. Unlike China, where the state actively invests in space programs across Africa, the US has largely left its space expansion to private interests. Elon Musk's SpaceX dominates the American space industry, but it has no interest in building Africa's space sector. Musk's focus is on profitable ventures like Starlink and Mars colonization, not on helping African nations develop independent space programs. The US government, instead of countering China's influence with its state-backed investments, has allowed private corporations to set the agenda, an agenda that does not prioritize Africa's role in space. Meanwhile, China has actively worked with African governments to establish ground stations, train engineers, and launch satellites, proving that its partnerships are based on long-term collaboration rather than short-term business deals. By failing to establish its network of ground stations in Africa, the U.S. has ceded control of one of the most strategic regions for space exploration. This means that China now has superior tracking capabilities in the southern hemisphere, while the U.S. is left with limited coverage. The difference between China and the U.S. in Africa's space sector comes down to respect. China listened to what African nations wanted and delivered, while the U.S. assumed it could dictate terms and lost its influence as a result. China did not treat Africa as a market for its technology. It helped Africa build its own. It did not hoard knowledge and limit access to space resources. It opened its universities, training centers, and research labs to African scientists. The U.S. still holds the world's most advanced space technology, but technology alone is not enough to win influence. By choosing control over cooperation, it has pushed Africa toward a future where China is the primary space partner for the continent. The real story here is not just that the U.S. is losing the space race in Africa, but that Africa is finally winning. With the right partnerships, African nations are no longer waiting for permission to join the space race. They are taking charge of their future. China's investments have accelerated Africa's entry into the global space industry, and the U.S. now faces a difficult choice: change its approach and start treating Africa as a true partner, or continue watching from the sidelines as Africa and China build the future together. One thing is clear: Africa's space age has arrived, and it is not looking back. Now the question is this a new space Cold War? The battle for space supremacy is no longer just about who lands on the moon first or who builds the most advanced satellites. It is about who controls the future of technology, data, and global influence. The growing divide between China and the United States in Africa's space sector is not just a regional issue. It is part of a larger geopolitical struggle that mirrors the old Cold War, but this time, the battlefield is space. For Africa, the rise of a new space race presents both opportunities and risks. On one hand, China's investment in African space programs is creating new scientific and economic opportunities. Countries that once had little involvement in space exploration are now launching satellites, training engineers, and participating in global space missions. However, this new reality also comes with challenges and potential consequences. If Africa becomes too dependent on Chinese technology, it risks becoming a passive player in China's space ambitions rather than an independent force. At the same time, aligning too closely with the United States could limit Africa's access to Chinese-funded infrastructure and scientific cooperation. Many African nations have chosen to remain neutral in the US-China space rivalry, accepting investment from both sides while maintaining diplomatic independence. Ethiopia, for example, has received space funding from China, but has also expressed interest in cooperating with the United States. South Africa has partnered with China on lunar exploration but remains engaged with Western-led scientific research programs. This balancing act reflects a broader trend in global politics, where African nations are no longer simply aligning with Western powers by default. Instead, they are making calculated decisions based on economic, scientific, and geopolitical interests. The coming years will determine whether Africa emerges as a true space power or remains a battleground for global superpowers. If African nations can leverage both US and Chinese investments to build their independent space programs, they could become key players in space governance, resource exploration, and satellite technology. Do you think the US should try to win back Africa? Should Africa prioritize China over the US? Let us know in the comments section. What's better for Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.